Welcome one of my educational heroes, Sir Ken Robinson.
How are you? Thank you. Welcome. Look, I've got to say a few welcomes. Can I welcome all the students from Trinity St David? Every time you say Trinity St David, they make that noise. So I'll try not to say it again. Also, the group from Israel. Where are you? And Spain. It's like the Eurovision Song Contest, isn't it? Welcome. It's fantastic to be here, and rather humbling. Because, by the way, can you hear me okay at the back? Can you? No. Do you have any idea what I'm saying? No, it's rather humbling because, as Dave said, I gave a talk at TED about 10 years ago now, and it seems to have been seen pretty much everywhere. And I feel a bit fraudulent. I mean, obviously it's very good, isn't it? Let's not be confused about why it's so successful. I mean, look at me. It wouldn't matter if I didn't say anything. It would go viral. But all I was really arguing is this, and it's all I've ever argued really, is that children, all of us, have really deep powers of innovation, not just creativity, but sensibility, of judgment. We're born with them, but it doesn't follow that we will develop them. That's a question of opportunity and education. And I have long believed that our dominant systems of education are not suited to the development of the talents that we now urgently need in our lives. You see, kids love to... In America just now, they're passing or have been for the past few years, passing legislation to approve same-sex marriage. And quite right. The interesting thing to me is, this did not happen because members of Congress retired to a retreat in Aspen and decided it was about time that they persuaded the country to go down this route. On the contrary, what happened was people across the country said, can we just do this now? In other words, it came from the ground up. It's not always reliable, by the way. As the recent election has shown us, you can't depend upon the wisdom of the people prevailing, but you can cultivate it. So I wanted to show you a couple of things that are related to this. This is where... Anybody got a third hand? Right. Have you seen this image before? This is a place... Oh, go back. This was a picture taken in eastern India. Sorry, I was just speaking into my walking stick. Of the teachers and students and the principals in the system, which is what Dave's been doing in Australia, and it's what people in this country are trying to do. People have got ideas, they need permission to develop them and put them into practice. We need to loosen the system up so people can believe that they can do things differently. What we should be doing is cross-pollinating the principles, not replicating a single practice. And as soon as you understand that you can free things up by applying the same principles in a different setting, then you start to liberate how it works. I say a lot of the problems in education are the result of how it's been configured over time. One of them, and I've often talked about it, is how, for example, we educate kids by age group. Why do we do that? I know there's some arguments for it, but really, schools are the only place where we segregate kids by age. When they go out of the school in the evening, they don't all go to separate compounds with their, with their date of birth on them. All the 9-year-olds live this way, please. And well, quite. So some of the things in our way, we can just get rid of them. And I'll tell you why it's important that we should. Without going to stuff we don't need to talk about right now, about the need for the change, I mean, some of the urgent pressures for change are to the rampant development of technology, the growth in human populations, the strains on the Earth's natural resources, all of that. I write quite a bit about it in the creative schools. But also our children are changing. And it's important we understand that they are changing in ways that were not true, certainly when I was a kid and when many of you were, even people who are quite young now, were not exposed to the same pressures they have. I mean, for example, puberty in human populations is a care. My conviction has always been that we're born with immense natural talents, but these are like the world's natural resources. They're often buried beneath the surface. They have to be identified, recognized, valued, and cultivated. Let's say all kids learn to speak, mostly, but if you're born in a household with 4 or 5 languages being spoken, you learn all of them. Kids do. I meet people in European institutions, Americans, who can speak several languages, not because they're linguistically gifted, but they grew up in a multilingual context. Because the fact is, learning is natural, but most of what we learn is actually cultural. So a lot of this is about opportunity and then having the support that's needed. So my base is this, that all of us, you included, do not live in one world. We all live in 2 worlds. And it's pretty obvious to say it, but it's true. That it's true of you and your children, that there is a world that exists only because you exist. And there's a world that exists whether or not you do. The outer world was there before you came into it. It will be there when you've gone. It's the world of other people, of events, of objects, of history, of technology, the world that surrounds your skin. That world was there when you came into it. Hopefully there'll be something of it left when you go. But there's another world that only exists because you exist. It came into being when you did, and it will either end or transmute when you do, according to your own belief system. It's your inner world of feelings, your inner world of perceptions. The only way in which you perceive the outer world is through this inner one. It's the world in which R.D. Laing once said there's only one set of footprints. Our schools are filled with the external world, but they pay far too little attention to the child's inner world, and it's the inner world that determines whether or not they engage with education or they don't, and what they make of themselves or they don't. So this very narrow conception of education, which has got focused on a small group of disciplines and standardization, is often directly at the expense of the richness of the child's inner life, which is the only thing really that they can depend upon to engage with the world around them. So I wanted to say what I thought the aims of education were. Education is one of those terms that the philosopher Walter Bryce Galley once said is essentially contested. What he meant is, we shouldn't assume we mean the same thing by it when we say it. To listen to politicians talk, they obviously don't mean what I mean by it. But there are other terms like that, like freedom is a contested concept. The founding fathers of America took it to be self-evident that all people are born free. But many of them owned slaves. So they clearly didn't think that was part of their conception of freedom. America, where I live now, promotes the idea of democracy around the world, and yet it seems to be incapable of conducting a democratic election. It means different things to different people. So education to me means this at least. I mean, you can disagree, I'm sure you will, but if I had to explain it, this is how I would say, this is what my touchstone, this is what I think we're talking about. That our aim of education is to enable students to understand the world around them, and that's why we need sciences, it's why we need the social studies, it's why we need technology. We're engaged in all of these processes, and the curriculum should be full of those things so we can understand the world that we've come into, how it got to be that way, and how we can shape it. but it should also help them understand the talents within them, as I say, so they can become fulfilled individuals and active and compassionate citizens. I did an event a few years ago. So I'm saying we live in two worlds, and the curriculum has to reflect all of that, and our teaching methods have to reflect that too. I just want to show you this quick video, which I came across recently. It's something I talk about in Creative Schools. It illustrates, I think, many of the points of innovation which are true in the work that I see around the world and which you will see too. One of the big problems in schools, as I see it, is that our kids aren't given access to the full range of their talents, and or what they're good at may not be valued. So people who have a more engaged and practical cast of mind are often marginalized by the imperative to theorize and do just purely academic work. This is a project that we came across in Kansas. It's only a couple of minutes long, and it explained itself, but these are kids who are failing at school, and look at what happens as a result of this particular project.
There's a lot of violence, drugs, gun violence, gangs and things like that.
Most of the people that I know, they do drugs, they went to juvie, jail.
Like if I would have kept doing what I was doing, I'd probably be sitting in jail, or my mom would have kicked me out by now.
We really wanted to form a program for high school kids. People think that at the high school age it's too late, and we're here to prove that it's not too late.
My Drive is an after-school program for kids, and we teach them about math and science, technology, the environment through hands-on projects. This year we took a carbon Ghia that was in pretty bad shape. The kids restored it literally from the bottom up, and then they converted it to be electric.
We stripped everything out of it, from the seats to the motor, every part. Kids my age built a car.
We're actually powering our car by social media. By having a device that will take your connections to us and turn it into social fuel and literally allow us to power the car between Kansas City and Washington, D.C.
We need enough tweets and enough Instagram pictures and Facebook posts to get this car started, so we can tell legislators about My Drive and what great influences it has on kids.
I want to thank everyone for coming today to kick off the My Drive social tour.
It's go time.
So they're making all these presentations, getting interviewed by the press, and then we start to see this spike in the social fuel.
People are tweeting about us, so our car is allowing us to drive it.
We find out that Mashables picked it up, and then we find out that Richard Branson wrote a blog about us. As students, they're really starting to feel like rock stars. The thing that surprised me the most was how broad the response was internationally.
Being able to go to Washington, D.C., you got a voice, spread the word, and
Creates the problem. If you change the system, the problem isn't so much solved, it just goes away. I feel that, if you're wearing a pair of shoes and they hurt because they're too small, don't polish them, take them off. Lift that thing off the gate so you can get through it. So there's a lot of room in the system, that's what I'm saying. I know that we all labour under terrible pressures. In this country, for example, head teachers in elementary schools and high schools are facing terrible problems over cuts in public spending. I couldn't minimise that. There's no doubt there's a political headwind that we are still struggling with, which is based on the belief that we have to stop all these programs and focus on a narrow core of academic work and just test kids till they drop. But the system creates the problem. And there is opportunity in the system to change it. People have often said to me, and they did when I was doing the book, how do I change the education system? And part of my answer is, you are the system. You're part of it. If you change what you do, for the children you affect, you have changed the education system. And if enough people do it, we change the whole system. That's how it works. That's why it comes from the ground up, not from the top down. So I just want to make a couple of other quick points before we're done here. One is this, that I think the first step is to be clear what a school is. I was asked a while ago if I thought schools were still the answer. I do. But it's important to understand that a school isn't necessarily the way we think of a school. At its heart, a school is a community of learners. That's it. People who come together to learn with and from each other. It could be at the side of a hill, it could be in a wood, it could be in somebody's garage, it could be anywhere. A school is simply a community of learners that comes together to learn with and from each other. All the things we've come to associate with schools are often the residue of the industrial origins of the mass system. And we can do without most of them. And even within the system, we can probably get rid of some of the things that we think are required because they're not. It's more that they're a habit than a point of legislation. That's, I know, what Dave has been doing in Australia. It's what's been happening in the democratic schools in Israel. It's what's been happening in groups like Big Picture School. It's what's behind all the schools that the 100 Project is looking at, people reinventing it from inside. The second thing is to recognize that the heart of a good school is not just students, but their relationship with teachers. There is no possibility of improving an education system beyond the ways in which we value, support, and train and encourage the work of great teachers. One of the things I was saying about the Dalai Lama, he was asked a question at some point during the course of this session, and he paused for a very long time, a bit like an uncomfortably long time, given I was chairing the session. And I thought he'd dropped off, and he was, and we're all leaning forward, metaphorically, for the answer. He was sitting cross-legged on this throne. And then he kind of took a breath. We thought, here it is. The answer we've been waiting for. And he said, I don't know. And I thought, what do you mean you don't know? You're the Dalai Lama. You have the definite article in your name. And he said, I've never thought about that before. What do you think? To the audience. You see, what I loved about that was firstly that he was quite willing to say he didn't know. Here's one of the great teachers in the world saying, I don't know. And the fact is we don't know everything. Despite Google, we don't know everything. Knowledge is a fabric that we weave together through our cultural interactions. And nobody knows everything, and we shouldn't claim to know everything. But the second thing is that he said, what do you think? Because what's implicit in that is that great teachers are also great students. And students have as much to learn from each other as from the teacher, and the teacher has as much to learn from the students as from the other teachers in the school. In other words, learning properly conceived, teaching and learning is a conversation. It's a multifaceted dialogue. It's not a monologue, saving what's happening right now. So part of the process of revolutionizing schools is to focus as well on the talents, capacities, and interests, and the need for revivification that teachers themselves have. You can do without everything else if you have a great relationship between teachers and learners. The second piece, though, is the curriculum. We have narrowed the curriculum unacceptably to the point now where we've got arts programs out, physical education programs out, vocational programs, practical programs like this, and it's all in the false interest of utility. This is the last clip I'll show you. It's a very brief one, but this is a school in Massachusetts called Orchard Park, which is one of the worst schools in the state, and nobody wanted. They'd had 5 head teachers in about as many years, and they were spending a fortune on security because there was so much violence going on in the schools. They hired a security firm to keep the place safe. A new head teacher came in and did something rather remarkable. Illustrators, which is what we know, is that learning is not a linear process, it's a dynamic one, it's an interactive one. Now, a linear analysis would tell you we need to improve maths and science scores, if that's what people believe is the priority. Therefore, we should cut all the other programs and do nothing but that. But any knowledge of human beings and how people live and thrive tells you that all these things work together to improve the overall growth and development of the child. And the word they use there is culture, and that's the thing I just want to end on. I've often spoken a lot about the industrial origins of education, but the point I'm making in Creative Schools is that the real metaphor for education is not industrial manufacturing, it's industrial agriculture. In the industrial period, agriculture became industrialized as well, through mechanization, through the development of chemical fertilizers, and also through pesticides. And it's been hugely successful from one point of view. Yields in farms and among animals, I mentioned the abattoir, have increased enormously. We do the same thing with animals. You know, we pump them full of antibiotics and we're full of hormones, and they get bigger and bigger. It's all about yield. But we've paid a big price for it too, because these are unnatural processes. We've exposed our animals to appalling suffering along the way, in a way that's indefensibly inhumane. But also, agriculturally, we've destroyed topsoils in many parts of the world and polluted waterways. So these systems, which are all about yield, have also proved to be unsustainable and inimical to our own existence on the earth. They are not consistent with the conditions we need to grow. The alternative system is organic farming. And the interesting to me about this is organic farmers are interested in the plants, but they don't focus on the plant. Organic farmers focus on the soil. They know if they get the soil right, the plant will be fine. So they use natural systems of composting, natural cycles of growth and development, of having fallow fields and the rest. But they make sure the soil is rich, sustainable, and constantly being refreshed and revivified by the process of growth itself. And the result is these things are long-term and sustainable. The analogy with schools is direct. I think we've spent too much time now focused on a narrow conception of what schools are about. The competitive standardization system has been promoting a view that it's all about output and yield, graduation rates, scores, international league tables, and it hasn't worked. It's been a busted experiment. The great schools, the ones I've shown you, the ones represented here, among many of the pioneers and innovators, the work that Dave's doing in Australia, are based on the organic principle. If you get the culture right in the school, you get the mix right, then everything grows and it takes care of itself. In the end, we are organic creatures, and the only way we'll make our children thrive is to understand the conditions under which all living things thrive. It's an ecosystem where one thing will feed another, and if the conditions are right, people will grow themselves. And that's, I think, our big challenge. You know, it's often said that if you watch a plant grow, it's a kind of miracle. Well, it is. And if you watch a child grow, it's a miracle too. And if you're in education, you're in the miracle business. And it's the only business really that we should be in. Thank you.